Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. Jessica Donovan here. And today I've got something a bit different planned for the podcast. Usually I'm, sharing information and teaching something related to kids' health and nutrition. And today I just really want to have a bit of a chat. This is going to be more conversational, and I just really feel the urge to share a bit about where I am at, and some personal insights about where I am at, really when it comes to the parenting journey. Now, I know that the vast majority of mums and dads in the Natural Super Kids audience that listen to this podcast, that follow us on Instagram, that are our Natural Super Kids Club members, have younger children than I do. So my kids are now 13 and 15. And look, I know we have some teen parents in our audience as well, probably that have been around for, a little while. I mean, I started Natural Super Kids quite a few years ago now when my kids were much younger. And obviously they've gotten older. Fancy that. And so I'm sure there are some of you in the audience that have been following along, as your kids have become teens as well. But I know from some of the polls and things that we do on Instagram, that the vast majority of you have younger children, from babies up until sort of 12 years old. But I think this will be interesting for you as well. I mean, I don't know. I feel like there is not a lot, or maybe not enough said about parenting teenagers. And I, for one, have definitely been shocked and surprised at, how out of depth I feel. And, some of the feelings and emotions that have come up for me through teen parenting. So I hope this is helpful for you. And I am going to say this is not an area I'm an expert in. Maybe teen health and nutrition and that sort of thing I am. But today I really do want to talk about this transition in the parenting journey that we all go through, from parenting younger children or primary school children into parenting teenagers. Because, when my kids were younger, they were toddlers, and at the preschool stage, I was really immersed in learning about parenting. I read a lot of parenting books. I went to parenting courses and parenting support groups. And I feel like I had a lot of support because I was hanging out with my kids a lot, and we were going to we used to go to a beautiful Waldorf Steiner-based playgroup once a week. We would go to kinder gym or music at the library, and we would hang out a lot with mums and kids. I was working a lot less. So I felt fairly well supported during that stage. Maybe that's rose-colored glasses, I'm not sure. And I, definitely understand how challenging, parenting toddlers particularly can be. But then, I felt like I found my groove. I found my mojo. And I think, I sort of feel like, again, maybe this is rose-colored glasses, there were certainly bumps along the way, but I feel like we cruised through the primary school years fairly easily. My kids both had really good, strong friendship groups. We live in a really lovely kind of close-knit community. And so, my kids didn't have a lot of issues at school. they did well in terms of keeping up with schoolwork and all of that thing. And socially, they were really settled. And as I said, had really good, strong friendship groups, which I know helps so much because I have friends that kids, are more sort of floaters or have a lot of issues with friends. So we didn't have any of that. But my youngest started high school last year. And my eldest, my son, started high school a few years before that. And I feel like there's a huge shift, a huge transition when my kids started high school. Now, I'm not sure if that is the same for everybody. My kids did go to a very small, school within our area, a very small sort of community school. It was a private school, but very small and, really, really strong community at that school. And their high school is much, much bigger and it's further away. So they travel, on the bus for half an hour to get to their high school. And it's huge. I think there's 1,200 plus kids at the high school from year 7 to 12. So I think that probably played a part in this huge difference, that I experienced in my kids as they went from primary school to high school. I feel like they just grew up so quickly and they were, I guess, exposed to the big wide world. I just still can't believe sometimes when I hear them talking among themselves, some of the words they use, the things that they are aware of, that I wouldn't have thought they were aware of. So an example of that is, so my kids do the dishes. They're responsible for cleaning up after dinner every night. And so I generally just sort of go into the living room adjacent to where they're washing up the dishes and, sit while they're cleaning up. And it's just really fascinating to listen to their conversation. And my daughter, who's 13, I don't know. I don't know what the conversation was around, but she said, "Oh, they've probably got an OnlyFans account or something like that." And I was like, "What? How does she know about these OnlyFans accounts?" So that's the sort of thing that, they hear. I don't know if she's even, knows what that is. We did have a conversation about it afterwards, but, they're the sorts of things that come up and it's like, whoa, how did you hear about that? Of course, she's at high school. They hear all these things. Another example, when my son was in his first year of high school, another child, an older teenager on the bus showed my son that live suicide. Do you remember that when that was going around a few years ago on TikTok, and it just kind of blew up and lots of kids saw it. And I was so mad because I'd said no to TikTok. I'd said no to social media. He wasn't on social media at that point. But it just goes to show that no matter what your rules are, when they're out in the big wide world and other kids have access to whatever they have access to on their phone, they can easily, your kids can easily be exposed to that. And that was just devastating. He was 13 at the time and, he didn't tell me until he was going to bed. And he was like, "I can't really sleep because this kid showed me this thing on the bus today." And as soon as he said it, I knew what it was because I'd heard that this had been circulating. And I thought, naively, my kids are safe. They don't have TikTok. It'll be fine. So they're the sorts of things that I'm talking about. They just suddenly get exposed to in the big wide world. And I feel like because my kids' primary school was so small, they were somewhat sort of protected. Their innocence was protected there. And I guess also I will say, I was when my kids were younger, I would have sort of identified as an attachment parent, a natural parent. We co-slept. I wore my babies and my toddlers. We used cloth nappies. We went to a Steiner Waldorf playgroup. My kids were attached to me, and I didn't work a lot in the early years of my kids growing up. My husband, I did work a little bit, and my husband would have the kids, for 1 or 2 days during the week while I did work, but they were, we were attached. And I, really did look forward to space. My daughter particularly was so clingy and, she just wanted to be cuddled all the time. She'd put her little arms up and be duddle, duddle. That was her most used word, especially at dinner time when you're trying to get things done. So I did feel, suffocated at times when my kids were little, and I really craved, a bit of space. I remember being at the beach once, my kids crawling all over me, sandy. And there was a mum that I was with who had slightly older kids who was sitting in her little chair reading a book. And I remember looking at her thinking, oh, God, I can't wait for that day where I can sit and read a book and not be, crawled all over by sandy children. But then the teenage years come along and I feel like they just, I don't know, it just felt like a very quick transition. I think more for my daughter than my son. I felt that kind of that quick intensity of, wow, she's really grown up, because she really did go from being the cuddliest, little girl to not wanting to touch me at all. I go to hug her now and she's stiff and she just puts her head forward for me to, kiss the top of her head. It was my birthday a couple of weeks ago and I said to her, I just want a cuddle with your arms around me for my birthday, please. And she did. She gave me a cuddle with her arms because she's just like a stiff board. So she's gone from this cuddly little thing to this not all that affectionate with me teenager. My son, who's older, is more cuddly with me than she is, which is so interesting, and so, the hormones come and they're transitioning to adults and they're becoming independent. All of the things that are supposed to happen, they're forming their own views and opinions. Some of them quite strong, some of them different to mine, which is like, different to when they are little. They are, turning into these independent beings where suddenly you realize that you're not their whole world anymore. And although this whole transition is beautiful and there's so much to be celebrated about watching your kids turn into, mini adults, teenagers, it can be quite a shock when you are not their whole world anymore. Their friends become all important, and you become less important. And that is the transition of them growing up, right? But teenagers are also known to be quite selfish, quite self-centered, quite know-it-all-y, lazy. Their brains are changing. They are developmentally, they are definitely, self-centered. They stop telling you everything about the things that are going on in their life. So that they are going through stuff, but they can be, they can be irritable, they can be emotional, they can be rude, they can be angry. And of course, all that comes out on you as their safe people. And you've got to really remember that, the reason they are treating you the way they are, just as toddlers do when they're, or younger children do when they're back in the safe space of home or the car after school and they let it all out. Teenagers do the same thing, but they're much more resistant in my, I guess, experience anyway, to you sort of just comforting them. It's different kind of comfort that they need. And I remember a few months ago, my son was mountain bike racing and he had a stack and he just was so disappointed, because with mountain bike racing, you get one go and they time you and that's it. That's your time for the day. And so he had this big stack. I didn't see it. It was up further on the hill. He got back on. I knew that something had happened because he was taking a while to come down, and I knew he was usually faster. Got to the end and all his friends kind of came up to him, and I could see he was quite emotional in his face, but he's 15. You can't. He wouldn't have accepted me going, "Oh mate, oh I'm so sorry that you must be so disappointed." You just can't comfort them the way you used to when they were younger. So you can see that they're going through feelings, going through emotions, but they're much more resistant to your comfort in a lot of ways. I guess as parents, we need to learn how to comfort them, in a different way. And I guess I was actually saying to my husband the other night, I know, like I feel like there's a lot of similarities between toddler parenting and teenage parenting, but with toddlers you can be more forgiving, right? They're still learning how to I guess express emotions, or how to behave, or whatever it might be. But with teenagers, of course, they are still learning. We're all still learning, right? How to express emotions healthily. But it can be more triggering because you feel like they should know better. That logically they should know. They know that this isn't the right way to behave. This isn't the right way to speak to you. This isn't, the right way to express, sadness or disappointment or anger. But you can have more sort of empathy and forgiveness. Again, this is my experience with toddlers, even though it can be really challenging. And of course, that was many years ago for me. So, you have these kind of faded memories of what it's like. But with teenagers, there can be those same kind of patterns of behavior, but there is it's harder to tolerate it. It's more triggering because they're bigger people and they should know better. So I feel like there are lots of, parenting in its very nature is very triggering, right? And, there's a lot that could be said on this, in terms of how we were parented, what we missed out on in terms of getting from our parents, all these things can lead to certain things being really triggering for us. But I feel like the triggering or the things that are triggering me in teenage parenting are next level compared to anything that I've experienced in my parenting journey sort of so far. And I think a lot of that does come down to the fact that logically you think, gosh, they should know better than this. They know not to speak to me like this, or whatever it might be. But I also do want to say that, teenagers are just amazing and wonderful as well. They can be smart and kind and funny, and it's, you see their little quirks come out, their particular sense of humor. My daughter has got this most sarcastic sense of humor, a bit like her dad. And she was saying to me the other day, I don't think my friends really get my jokes sometimes. So those little quirks and things that come out about in their little personalities or their bigger personalities, you can really start to see what interests them, where their curiosity is leading them, what they're engaged in. They can have great ideas. You can have amazing conversations with them. You can have a lot of fun with them. So I don't want to paint this picture of like teenage parenting being something to sort of dread in the future if you have younger kids, because there are so many wonderful things about teenagers. You can involve them more in your day-to-day world, if they will agree to spend time with you, that is. But what I've really struggled with, that has really surprised me when it comes to my kids getting older, and it took me a while to really be able to name it, is grief. And I said this out loud to a friend, for the first time, and I'm like, it just that I'm like, yes, that's what it is. It's grief. It's the grief of losing your little people. And I think, look, there's grief through all the parenting stages, right? You get to the toddler years and you grieve that baby, that little newborn baby that you had, or that little beautiful 6-month-old that you had. But again, I think it's next level when your kids get to the teenage years, because things change so much. And I think a big part of what I've been grieving is the tight family unit, being able to the kids just kind of following along with what you're doing in your life, and the parents, my husband and I, being able to kind of choose what we do on the weekend, for example. So, Sundays used to always be family day. We would go out for an outing. We would go often for a walk or to the beach, or do something in nature, in the natural environment, because that's our favorite thing to do. We'd go camping, or just day trips out. And the kids don't want to do that anymore. It's really hard. It's a real effort to get them to agree to come out for the day. But also, like, what are we going to do? And I've got 2 very different children that are into very different things. So that can be really tricky. And, to be honest, we've really given up on those Sunday family days. Not completely. And I guess you do have to, this is what I mean. It's the letting go. It's the grief of, like, what we had is not realistic to hold on to anymore. It's the grief of, being in control. Like I said, I used to be able to say, right, let's go down to Deep Creek, one of my favorite places in the world, which is only about 40 minutes away, and we'll walk to the waterfall, or we'll go for a hike, or we'll go camping. And now, not that there wouldn't be any sort of, I guess, complaints or anything. Once we were walking, it wasn't easy to go for a hike with younger kids, but now they'll just flat out refuse to come. So it's the grief of losing that, and that tight family unit, and the grief of letting go of, or the grief of losing the fact that you are the kids' whole world. You're just not anymore. They've got other influences. They've got friends. They might have part-time jobs. They have their, passions, their sports, whatever, which is great. That's what we want. We don't want our teenage kids clinging on too tightly to us, right? So I know this is all positive stuff, but it doesn't mean that these feelings don't come up. And that's why I wanted to talk about this, because I really wasn't prepared for this feeling of grief and the emotions that come up, that bubble up to the surface, with that, that feeling, that those feelings of grief. The grief of not being together all the time, the grief of the kids losing their innocence, losing that, that funny innocence that they once had. And people say, oh, they'll come back around, and nearly everyone says that when I talk about this to people. They come back around, when they're 18, 19 or whatever. And I get that, I'm sure that does happen to an extent, but it will never be the same again. We'll never be that tight family unit of 4, that spends so much time together. And there's this trend on Instagram. I'm sure you've seen these, heartfelt reels that talk about, by the time your kids are 12, you've spent 75% of the time you'll ever spend with them, or whatever it is. And they're designed to help parents of younger kids make the most of that time. But I don't think it's really helpful for parents of younger kids, because there's that pressure of oh my God, I should be enjoying this. I should be enjoying every moment, making the most of every moment, when it's hard. But then on the other hand, for us parents that are past that age 12, it can be really confronting, thinking, wow, I've had the vast majority of the time that I ever will have with my kids is past. And that is sad, and there's a lot of emotions that come up with that. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And that's what I have been feeling, really over the last, I think this has really hit home over the last sort of 12 months, maybe my daughter's only turned 13 at the start of this year, so maybe 6 months ago. But because she started high school a little bit younger, I do feel like she sort of transitioned into those teen years a bit sooner. So yeah, I wanted to just share my thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. If you are a parent of teenagers, or if you're not, and this has been helpful, you've resonated with any of this in any way, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids. Send me a message and let me know, how you found this conversation. As I said, whether you resonated with it. But to finish off, I want to just give you a resource, because I have found this lady super helpful, I should say. Her name is Kirsten Kobabe. She lives in Hawaii. I've actually interviewed her for the club. So if you are a Natural Super Kids Club member, you can find my chat with Kirsten Kobabe, who is the teenage whisperer in the Natural Super Kids Club. If you're not in the club, I'll make sure I pop a link to the waitlist in the show notes, so you can head on over and sign up if you're interested in knowing when we next open the doors. In the Natural Super Kids Club, we give you access to a whole heap of different resources to help you boost the health and nutrition of your kids, and of course, support from our team of practitioners. And what we don't often talk about in the club, there are a lot of parenting resources in there, because obviously all of us need help with this whole journey of parenting. And so she is amazing. You can find her on Instagram and obviously on her website as well. I'll pop the links in the show notes. Her posts just speak to me, and I want to just read one of her most recent posts out. It says, what your teenager really needs from you and why it matters and how to offer it. One of the most impactful ways parents can support their teen is to listen. There's a difference between the kind of listening where you hope the complaining stops so you can offer advice, and the kind of whole self-present listening where you allow space for their big feelings. And teens can sense the difference. They don't often want advice or for you to fix their feelings. What teens often want is to be seen by a sound and steady you. Reframe what it means when your teen comes to you with complaints, frustrations, and big feelings. It means that you are still their person, or at the very least, it means that they want you to know about their life and their world. You are their safe person to process with, or at the very least, they want you to be. Instead of seeing these moments as a nuisance, see them as an invitation to connect and listen. The way they are with you is not an accurate representation of how they are at school with friends and teachers, or at work with their boss. Their lives are quite full and challenging, and they've been holding it together, which means they need a space to talk about it. Put on your listening ears and be that sacred space. Instead of trying to shut it down, open up the door and welcome it all in. You can handle it, and your teen needs to feel it. Teens are looking for a sense of stability during a time when so much is shifting for them. The teen years are disruptive and dysregulating. Expect there to be bumps, outbursts, frustration, and storms. This is when and how teens are learning essential regulation skills. The act of expressing emotions itself can be relieving, and if they skip it, they might miss it. You get to be the captain during the storm. Teens are looking to you for clear and calm waters, for safe refuge and a place to put their mess. Make space for their waves instead of adding to their storm. Watch in awe as they naturally begin to navigate their ship with you as their guide. Let them talk and talk and talk. It won't last forever. Your presence is more meaningful than any attempt to fix their feelings or to make things better. When you activate authentic presence and a listening ear, there is so much room for you to be imperfect, to say the wrong words even, because your teen has felt seen. No need for perfect scripts when you are truly listening. Offer teens the space to share without saying it's not that bad or to look on the bright side. When parents don't push that agenda, teens can move through the emotions naturally. They don't want perfection. They want your present heart. Listen, listen, listen. And instead of lecturing, you might try. That sucks. That is so hard. I would feel that way too. Nothing is going right today. I'm listening. What's the hardest part? If it were magically better, what would that look like? Is there anything I can do? It's hard now. I'm here. Imagine your teen tells you they had the worst day, from being late for a class to randomly called on, plus a pop quiz. They're looking for you to be with them in their pain, sitting by their side, holding it with them so that they aren't alone. That's often the hardest part of pain. When teens hear it's not that bad, stop complaining and to be grateful, they learn that you don't get it. They must face their feelings alone and that they cannot share with you. Listening and reflecting back what you heard, perhaps you say, that is so hard. Might feel like nothing or even wrong, but it is everything to your teen. When you listen with your whole soul, it can change everything. Your teen will express and process, moving their emotions through. And if you or they get stuck, then that is helpful to know and you can find the right kind of support. I mean, how powerful is that at any stage of parenting? I think there's so much gold in there. So I highly recommend, following Kirsten Kobabe, because her posts just, as I said, I read this the other day. I'm like, oh, I'm a very positive, optimistic person. And I find my son can be a bit of a complainer. And I'm like, oh, and I've said things like that. Oh, it's not that bad. Look on the bright side. Maybe not look on the bright side, but, trying to get him to see things from a positive angle. And just reading that, I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. So, I'm right there with you. This parenting journey is a challenging one. I hope my insights have been helpful. If you're still listening, thank you. And I'd love to hear from you over on Instagram. All right. I will be back in your ears with a new episode next week. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.